Well, folks, we did it. We made it through another insane year of professional wrestling. I say it every year and it rings more true every time. 2023 is going to go down as one of the wildest on record for both good and bad. And hey, who better to tell you what qualifies as either of those than me, some guy on the internet. I know you've been waiting a while for this one, so I'm going to give it to you. My top 8 picks for the worst things to happen in professional wrestling in 2023. By the way, wrestler deaths will not be covered on here. We're just going to talk about TV and pay-per-view related things here. And don't worry, the toxic online fan base may not actually be ranked this year, but they do hold a permanent place of dishonor. Let's go. Number 8, the curse of the WWE Women's Tag Team Championship. Every once in a while, a championship is at the center of so many instances of bad luck and timing, it's easy to think it might be cursed. Remember the IWGP World title in 2021? At the start of the year, the belts were in a featured position as Io Sky and Dakota Kai of Damage Control held them until they were bested by a makeshift team of Becky Lynch and Lita in late February. Not ideal booking, but so far so good. A storyline betrayal by Trish Stratus and her plot to screw Becky out of the gold turned out to be a harbinger for some real bad luck a month later. Liv Morgan, who won the belts from Becky and Trish with Raquel Rodriguez, suffered a shoulder injury and was briefly out. The vacated titles were placed on the destructive duo of Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler. Those two did manage to unify the WWE and the NXT women's tag belts, which was probably for the best, but the union didn't last long as the Bays decided she hated Ronda more than she loved being a champion, sacrificing the titles back to Raquel and returning Liv Morgan. Oh, by the way, honorable mention for this year goes to that awful MMA rules match that Shayna and Ronda had at SummerSlam after this breakup happened. A new tandem of Chelsea Green and Sonya Deville beat Raquel and Liv for the belts just 2 weeks later. Liv hurt her shoulder again not long after, but not to be outdone, Sonya tore her ACL a week or two later. But instead of vacating the belts yet again, this time Piper Niven stepped in to replace Deville, creating a sort of odd couple pairing with Chelsea. At nearly 150 days, the longest reign all year, Green and Niven gave the belts some much-needed stability, and have been a pretty good act together to boot. 2023 closed out with Katana Chance and Kaden Carter becoming the new champions, as fans began to look at the division with renewed optimism. Needless to say, it took a long time for WWE to finally shake what started 2 years ago when Sasha Banks and Naomi walked out. Number 7, the NWA blows it. Remember the pre-pandemic days of the NWA revival? Remember Into the Fire? Remember how Nick Aldis as their forever champion was seemingly the biggest problem they had? Good times, man. Good times. Billy Corgan's National Wrestling Alliance generally flew under the radar for most of the year. Well, mostly. The thing the promotion was best known for was also considered its greatest weakness, as Tyrus held the 10 pounds of gold for much of the year, well into the summer. It seemed as if Corgan liked the recognition of the NWA World's title being seen on Fox News every week, whatever that did to help the company. This is, by the way, the same Fox News Tyrus was working at when he settled a sexual harassment suit from a female colleague out of court. Also the same Fox News where he openly stated he would beat up hypothetical transgender children at a swim meet, and the same Fox News where he said he would beat his own children if they shared their pronouns with him. Now, even if you don't care about Tyrus's politics, or his attitude towards women, or his fear of things he doesn't understand, the real important thing about all this is that Tyrus was an objectively terrible wrestler and an even worse champion. It was long overdue when EC3 beat him for the belt, and soon enough things began to look up when the NWA seemed to land a pair of TV deals with the CW. Yes sir, things are beginning to look all right for...
Okay, all right, well it's definitely pay-per-view, folks.
Look, I love Father James Mitchell. Friend of the show, he was in my Heroes of Wrestling video, he was a guest at my WrestleCon table in Orlando, he's awesome. But I don't think Billy Corgan's gonna win Booker of the Year by showing Sin Min and the rest of his posse snorting the white gimmick on live pay-per-view. Who did this segment help besides people who already like to dump on the NWA? Maybe Corgan thought he could get away with it because they were behind a paywall, being on pay-per-view and everything, but it turns out TV executives can still see what's going on. Because, you know, they have eyes. There was an immediate pushback from the very first sniff, and long story short, plans went from the NWA gets 2 shows on CW programming to NWA Power appears on the CW app. Something tells me a bit of foresight could have prevented this. Then again, foresight could have also prevented a near 300-day title reign for Tyrus. For now, the NWA will have to keep plugging away after their original plans for TV were rendered to a fine pile of dust. Number 6. The Chris Jericho-Don Callis Black Hole. In the early days of AEW, there existed a fantastical place known as the Codyverse, a realm where few individuals left looking any better than they did when they came in. All that mattered was the awesome being at the center of that verse. Now, since Cody has left the company, that universe still remains, only now it's under new Canadian ownership. Before we get too deep into that though, first things first, the Chris Jericho-Adam Cole feud last year was one of the worst programs anywhere, full stop. It seemed to be built in reverse, with the most animosity and violence in the beginning, the comparatively tame mixed tag match being the blow-off. It gave the world this all-time terrible t-shirt and AEW one of its worst pay-per-view matches all year, an unsanctioned bout at Double or Nothing featuring Sabu as the guest enforcer for some reason. At least he got paid. Then the Jericho Appreciation Society, which was just a less interesting inner circle aside from Daddy Magic, finally crumbled over the summer when Chris up and left his appreciators to join his longtime friend, despised mega heel Don Callis. Callis then chose to preemptively betray Chris for reasons. This was meant to garner sympathy for Jericho, by the way. And ever since then, the two have been at odds with each other, gobbling up the momentum of plenty of others in the process. After the group's collapse, most of the former JAS members did next to nothing for the rest of the year, save for Daniel Garcia, who was booked as an underdog in the Continental Classic. Meanwhile, all members of the Don Callis family have been mostly interchangeable faces in the background, seemingly none of whom are intended to get more attention than the mouthpiece. What happened to Powerhouse Hobbs? What happened to Konosuke Takeshita? That guy beat Kenny Omega twice last year and is now just another guy. Then there was Sammy Guevara, a man who's been linked to Y2J in some form or fashion from day one in AEW. He lost to Jericho in a match, betrayed him to join Don Callis, got injured, then came back months later to quit the family and go back to Chris for, you guessed it, no reason. But it's worth pointing out the bad luck of other Jericho associates late in this last year, like Kenny Omega with his diverticulitis, or how Kota Ibushi looked at Pro Wrestling Noah at the beginning of this year. I mean, you want to talk about a curse. The crazy world of Chris and Don is just a bloated version of the Codyverse. It has all the same hallmarks of flat storytelling and no payoff to anyone but the central figures, only now they're working double time and sucking the life out of even more stars. Number 5, the Mountain Dew Pitch Black Look, hey, don't get mad, okay? Don't get mad. You know I'm right. You know I'm right. Look, Bray Wyatt's death was absolutely heartbreaking. It was a massive tragedy. I heard that news and I was leveled. It's heartbreaking. It sucks. It's absolutely terrible. However, we all saw that match, and I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that it was any good. Bray Wyatt's chilling and dramatic return to WWE in October of 2022 was one of the coolest things the company had done in a long time. The fans were all in on Bray's return, his attempt at redemption, his battle within himself, and just what was the deal with this Uncle Howdy guy? To show you what a difference a year can make, the recently unmaximized LA Knight was Bray's first target, and a match was made for the Royal Rumble pay-per-view. Nobody knew just what the rules for a Mountain Dew Pitch Black match were, other than that it would be some spin on their typical no DQ style match. The spectacle peaked at the opening bell when the lights were lowered to reveal a glowing ring, glowing tights, and a glowing Bray Wyatt who had been wearing hidden body paint. The presentation and the reveal were really cool. Then they had to wrestle. The in-ring action itself was nothing special, not that you could tell since everything was so dark. They did get glowing weapons and some radioactive packing peanuts that burst out of the announce table though. Bray won the match handily, then put on a new mask that no one had seen before, then Uncle Howdy showed up and did a stage dive onto LA's prone body kinda before everything exploded. Mountain Dew, bitches! The entire match was a mind warp, and the main selling point of this match, the thing that was so different from everything else, made it really difficult for fans to see what was going on. And with the addition of new pieces of ever-evolving Wyatt lore while fans are still trying to figure out what had happened 2 chapters earlier, the match was not received well. It seemed to confirm a perception that persisted throughout Bray's first run, that maybe his art was a little too out there to translate to the wrestling canvas. But then again, art is subjective, and perhaps it was the fans who weren't ready for him, not the other way around. The pitch black match would be Bray's last televised in-ring performance before he was removed to address an illness. And ultimately, the true tragedy of Wyndham Rotunda's untimely passing was a moment that rocked the wrestling world to its core. A moment as shocking, surreal, and impossible to explain as perhaps the story of the Bray Wyatt character himself. Number 4. WWE's mass releases. By now, it's become somewhat of an annual tradition, WWE cutting a metric shit ton of wrestlers, and in 2023, the bloodletting was no different. In all, WWE cut ties with 21 wrestlers this past September, some of which we hadn't seen in ages, some who hadn't been on TV at all, and some who were on TV as recently as that same week. The most notable names included Mustafa Ali, Rick Boogs, Emma, Riddick Moss, Elias, Shelton Benjamin, and Dolph Ziggler, who earlier in the year had just been NXT champion. Matt Riddle was the last big firing of the season, though it seems like his had more to do with him becoming a giant headache for the company than it did with WWE's bottom line. I'm hopeful that everyone who is released can land on their feet and do well for themselves outside of the world of WWE, but it's always hard to see wrestlers getting the axe through no fault of their own. The sad reality is these mass releases are to be expected now, but cutting all these wrestlers for budget reasons the same week the company reports record earnings? I don't know, man, that's kind of rude, isn't it? Number 3. Cody Rhodes loses at WrestleMania.
Cody, bro. Yeah, it's Cody, bro. It's gotta be Cody.
It was not unreasonable to assume that Cody Rhodes was going to enter WrestleMania 39 the valiant hero and leave as the new undisputed Universal Champion. After gutting it out through a gruesome pectoral injury and coming back to win the 2023 Royal Rumble, you would think the next obvious move for Cody would be for him to finish that story he's always telling, beat Roman, and become the new champion. It happened for the H-Man, didn't it? And hey, 2.5 years was a plenty long time to be on top, so Roman Reigns, we thank you for your service. You have more than made up for those dreadful first few years as a singles star. You've definitely earned your time off. So let's just wrap up this kick-ass Mania weekend, have you drop the belt to the Codester, and we can all just... But the story. The story! If it wasn't going to be Kevin Owens, and if it wasn't going to be Sami Zayn, and if we know it wasn't going to be Jey Uso either, then why not Cody? It felt like it was the perfect time, and on a show that had already given fans so much of what they wanted, what a concept, right? It could have been an easy layup to have the night end on another high note. Here's the biggest gripe I have with Roman retaining, and I know I am not the only person who says this. Everything that happened to him in the rest of 2023 not only could have still happened without him holding the belt, it would have also made a whole lot more sense. The Bloodline's breakup and Roman's feud with Cousin Jey, no title needed. The match with LA Knight, no title needed. After already merging their 2 world championships at Mania 38, WWE had to dilute the title picture yet again by pulling the world title out of the mothballs. Seth Rollins has been doing fine as the champ, but had Cody just won the first time at Mania, he could have had a whole lot of other interesting battles for the belt with a lot of other people, including Seth Rollins. At the very least, the champ would have been around more. Now, the whole reason we didn't get Cody winning in Los Angeles because obviously it's to set up their rematch in Philadelphia this year. So, the American Nightmare, the American hero Cody is going to do the most patriotic thing in the nation's birthplace and beat Roman Reigns for the championship.
Should The Rock sit at the head of the table?
Can't wait to see what happens in April. Number 2, the injury bug is all elite. Injuries are an unfortunate reality in professional wrestling, at all levels in every company. People can get hurt in wrestling even if they do everything right. Now, in the past, I've talked about specific years where WWE in particular was snake bit, but this past year, it was AEW's turn to feel the pain. The run of bad luck seemed to begin at ROH's Supercard of Honor when Dante Martin suffered a horrific leg injury during a multi-team ladder match. At Double or Nothing in May, then women's champ Jamie Hayter suffered an injury in her loss to Toni Storm. Next up was former ROH World Champion Bandito, who broke his wrist shortly after signing a long-term deal with AEW. Pac's been hurt, Jon Moxley got his bell rung by Rey Fenix in his first and only international title offense, a match where Fenix himself aggravated an old injury. Sammy Guevara got concussed. Aussie Open's Mark Davis has been gone since WrestleDream. Juice Robinson suffered a 1-2 punch of a back injury and appendicitis. And speaking of guts, there's also Kenny Omega's recent bout with diverticulitis. Perhaps the most pivotal injury came at Grand Slam at Arthur Ashe Stadium when Adam Cole severely hurt his ankle in a freak accident when he leapt from the rampway to the floor while trying to help MJF. It seemed to throw a huge wrench into the company's top storyline between he and Max, but at least they still got to do the devil reveal at the end of the year. And it didn't help matters that MJF himself got injured late into his title reign, suffering a torn labrum and a dislocated hip at Full Gear when he made the curious decision to do a flying elbow drop off the top after seeing the announce table could no longer break his fall. Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. And let's not forget Bryan Danielson, who not only broke his arm during his match with Okada at Forbidden Door, but healed up just in time to have his orbital bone broken, which he's wrestled with for weeks. We can only hope that the injury rate slows down in 2024. You never want to wish this kind of thing on anybody, and it just wreaks havoc on all creative plans. If this were any other year, this would be the worst thing to happen in wrestling and AEW in this countdown. But my pick for the #1 worst moment in wrestling in 2023 was AEW fumbles CM Punk. The last time I talked about CM Punk on this channel, it turned out to be quite the Rorschach test for viewers. Was I pro-Punk? Anti-Punk? Was I pro-elite? Anti-elite? Well, yes. Also, no. But no matter how people tried to interpret what I said, one thing remains objectively true, and that's the way AEW handled CM Punk cost them dearly in more ways than one. The acrimonious departure of Punk after what happened at All In was the peak of what had already been a year full of controversy, politics, and bullshit between Punk, the EVPs, and the greater AEW ecosystem in general. No matter where you stand on the matter, most people would agree that ignoring a problem, or trying to do everything except just solving a problem, can only make said problem worse in the end. And that's exactly what happened when Punk and Jack Perry had their backstage fight. When Punk returned to WWE late last year, it was a huge blow to AEW. It was their second big-name talent who had jumped ship in as many years, one who objectively brought eyeballs and attention to their product. Combine that with all those aforementioned injuries to the roster, and it's easy to see why AEW's fourth quarter ended up being such a mixed bag. And even though the narrative is that Punk has changed since walking out of WWE 10 years ago, a lot of his later behavior in AEW, what can be confirmed at least, didn't make him look much better either. The story of AEW is far from over, despite what some folks braying on social media may tell you. Regardless, years from now, we'll look back at the mishandling and dramatic exit of CM as a major turning point in their history. If AEW can recover and continue to thrive and succeed, it'll be seen as a growing pain or a bump in the road. But if I ever one day have to make a promotion graveyard video about All Elite Wrestling, it'll be hard not to look at this as one of its biggest black eyes that cost them a lot of goodwill from fans and money. And that's why the chaotic end of CM Punk and AEW is my pick for the worst thing to happen in wrestling in 2023. But those are just my thoughts, folks. What do you think belongs on the worst of list for 2023? Drop them in the comments. Stay tuned for later this month when I deliver my best of wrestling in 2023 list. And folks, it's going to be full of great stuff on all sides. I can't wait to be a little more optimistic a couple weeks from now. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.